Good evening. Welcome. Here is today's news wrap and updates from the White House and beyond. President Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris and their team continue to monitor the situation, the ongoing situation in the Middle East, and are working with partners on the ground, including Egypt, as well as other Middle East partner on the ground to ensure that both Israel and Hamas, both sides, reach a ceasefire deal soon. Their team also, and the president and the vice president also are monitoring the situation on the Iranian attack on Israel that took place over this weekend, and they continue to monitor that situation very closely and are prepared to respond accordingly as necessary. And moving to other talk, President Biden also today spoke with the Prime Minister of India, Prime Minister Modi, regarding the ongoing situation in Ukraine. And they also talk about the Ukraine sovereignty. Of course, we know previously this is the first time that the Prime Minister is announcing and speaking out for sovereignty, for Ukraine sovereignty. It was previously visited Russia and met with the president of Russia, President Putin. So as a member, India is also a member of the BRIC alliance, the BRIC Plus alliance, which Russia also is a member of. This meeting today, this conversation today with between the president and the prime minister. India, of course, is a regional ally, or as well as a global ally of the U.S. In the South Asia region. This is very key, very important to bring in more support for the ongoing effort for Ukraine to continue to defend itself against Russia aggression. And the president this week will be in Delaware, staying in Delaware in his home, in his beach home in Rehoboth Beach in Delaware, where he will remain for the remainder of the week. The vice president returned to the White House this week after an historic week last week in Chicago, where he accepted the Democratic nomination as the presidency nominee for the DNC, for the Democratic National Committee. So the vice president also this week we hit the campaign trail traveling to battleground states this week to meet with voters, to lay the groundwork. As we know, in November the upcoming election is only 2 months away, 2 months plus away. So this this could be being on the campaign trail and meeting with voters in the next couple of weeks. The president, the vice president, as well as the president Biden and the first lady have pledged also to support her, continue to support her, and we also be on the campaign trail in the next coming weeks. And staying in the U.S. Relating to the White House. The White House National Security Advisor, Jake Sullivan, will arrive in China tomorrow, in Beijing tomorrow, for talks, strategic talks on security and trade with the Chinese foreign minister. Of course, this built upon the earlier talk from earlier this year in January, where they met in Thailand for strategic talk, as well as the summit between President Biden and President Xi Jinping of China that took place in November of last year in California. So, as well as other talk that have taken place through the Biden-Harris administration, Biden presidency, over the past 3.5 years, the talk that have taken place between the team As we know, China and the U.S. Are the number one and number two biggest economic in the world, and they're as well as competitors. So the what I just thought we have consequential results for the global economic as well as for global trade. So we will continue to pay closer attention to what is going on. As we know, China is very, very involved. I've been in the past 2 decades in Africa regarding infrastructure, and the U.S. The Biden administration have taken a different route, a different strategic route of developing and building upon the relationship that they've had with the African nations and African leaders over years, as we building on the people-to-people relationship, as well as building infrastructure, working with partners on the ground, including through the Lobito corridor that will be expanded. That was announced last week. Will also be expanded to Tanzania. We now include Tanzania. So they are taking different routes of engaging with Africa as well as emerging economics. So they are the two top economic in the world, and the consequences of this talk we have will be consequential for the rest of the world. So we will be paying closer attention to that. Shifting gear, today the World Health Organization announced that it has launched a global a coordinated global strategic preparedness and response plan to halt the spread of the mpox outbreak. Congo, East and Central Africa. There are 12 countries in the region that currently, where the outbreak currently are affected. So they announced today that this plan built on the temporary recommendation. Last week, Friday, there was a meeting with members of the World Health Organization. So this built from that temporary recommendation, built on the plan that will include surveillance, prevention, readiness, and response to coordinate the ongoing efforts on the ground, on the local as well as global efforts to ensure there is stop to the transmission of the outbreak. This also comes as today the government of Germany announced that if we donate $100,000, if we donate 100,000 mpox vaccine to the ongoing efforts that we are the spread of the outbreak. Of course, like the U.S. Was the first to announce that we donate 50,000 doses of mpox vaccine, and he also announced the funding of over $50 million that have been donated to the effort to ensure that ensure the response of the to the mpox outbreak that is on the continent right now. There have been announcements, as we reported, of one person in Thailand that there's one case there and there's another case in Sweden. So this is now a global response. As we know, the World Health Organization has called it a global emergency, and is working with African leaders, African Union, and the African CDC to ensure an effective response to the outbreak. And speaking of health, Dr. Anthony Fauci, who we know very well helped with the coordination of the COVID-19 pandemic response. It was announced that he was hospitalized for West Nile virus. but he has returned home where he is now recovering. So this is just a reminder of some of the health issues that are arising around the world, mosquito-borne um, diseases that have been surging around the world, including the dengue that we see in Latin America. So this is just another reminder of some of the health crises that are sort of popping up around the world. And staying in the region, the General Brown spoke with Kenya Defense Minister today regarding regional as well as global issues. As we know, Kenya soldiers were deployed helping with the situation in Haiti. And the U.S. is the largest financial contributor to this effort. And I've been working along with President William Ruto and the defense team to ensure the response to that region, as well as ongoing crises in the African region, in the East Africa, as well as in the Sahel. And now, staying in the region, Spain Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez will arrive on the continent this week for a three-nation tour. It would be in Senegal, Gambia, and Mauritania. This, of course, is part of the European Union effort to address the migration crisis, the Mediterranean migration crisis, to work with partners on the continent to find a better alternative of alternative developing more ways and building regarding funding and building an economic enabling environment that create more opportunities for youth on the continent of Africa, so they don't have to take this risky trip across the Mediterranean, where a lot of them often perish on their way to Europe. And lastly, on Friday, the Federal Reserve of the Federal Reserve Chair Jay Powell signal that interest rate cut signal on. Let's start over again. The Federal Reserve Chair Jay Powell on Friday signaled interest rate cuts and expressed confidence that inflation is within reach of U.S. Central Bank 2% target. As we know, U.S. Dollar is the top currency of the global world.
Thank you, Karen, and thanks to our host from the Kansas City Fed. It's great to be back here today. 4.5 years after COVID-19's arrival, the worst of the pandemic-related economic distortions are fading. Inflation has declined significantly. The labor market is no longer overheated, and conditions are now less tight than those that prevailed before the pandemic. Supply constraints have normalized, and the balance of risks to our two mandates has changed. Our objective has been to restore price stability while maintaining a strong labor market, avoiding the sharp increases in unemployment that characterized earlier disinflationary episodes when inflation expectations were less well anchored. While the task is not complete, we have made a good deal of progress toward that outcome. Today, I will begin by addressing the current economic situation and the path ahead for monetary policy. I will then turn to a discussion of economic events since the pandemic arrived, exploring why inflation rose to levels not seen in a generation and why it has fallen so much while unemployment has remained low. So let's begin with the current situation and the near-term outlook for policy. For much of the past 3 years, inflation ran well above our 2% goal, and labor market conditions were extremely tight. The FOMC's primary focus has been on bringing down inflation, and appropriately so. Prior to this episode, most Americans alive today had not experienced the pain of high inflation for a sustained period. Inflation brought substantial hardship, especially for those least able to meet the higher costs of essentials, like food, housing, and transportation. High inflation triggered stress and a sense of unfairness that linger today. Our restrictive monetary policy helped restore balance between aggregate supply and demand, easing inflationary pressures and ensuring that inflation expectations remained well anchored. Inflation is now much closer to our objective, with prices having risen 2.5% over the past 12 months. After a pause earlier this year, progress toward our 2% objective has resumed. My confidence has grown that inflation is on a sustainable path back to 2%. Turning to employment, in the years just prior to the pandemic, we saw the significant benefits to society that can come from a long period of strong labor market conditions. Low unemployment, high participation, historically low racial employment gaps, and with inflation low and stable, healthy real wage gains that were increasingly concentrated among those with lower incomes. Today, the labor market has cooled considerably from its formerly overheated state. The unemployment rate began to rise over a year ago and is now at 4.3%, still low by historical standards, but almost a full percentage point above its level in early 2023. Most of that increase has come over the past 6 months. So far, rising unemployment has not been the result of elevated layoffs, as is typically the case in an economic downturn. Rather, the increase mainly reflects a substantial increase in the supply of workers and a slowdown from the previously frantic pace of hiring. Even so, the cooling in labor market conditions is unmistakable. Job gains remain solid, but have slowed this year. Job vacancies have fallen, and the ratio of vacancies to unemployment has returned to its pre-pandemic range. The hiring and quits rates are now below the levels that prevailed in 2018 and 19. Nominal wage gains have moderated, and all told, labor market conditions are now less tight than just before the pandemic in 2019, a year when inflation ran below 2%. It seems unlikely that the labor market will be a source of elevated inflationary pressures anytime soon. We do not seek or welcome further cooling in labor market conditions. Overall, the economy continues to grow at a solid pace, but the inflation and labor market data show an evolving situation. The upside risks to inflation have diminished, and the downside risks to employment have increased. As we highlighted in our last FOMC statement, we are attentive to the risks to both sides of our dual mandate. The time has come for policy to adjust. The direction of travel is clear, and the timing and pace of rate cuts will depend on incoming data, the evolving outlook, and the balance of risks. We will do everything we can to support a strong labor market as we make further progress toward price stability. With an appropriate dialing back of policy restraint, there is good reason to think that the economy will get back to 2% inflation while maintaining a strong labor market. The current level of our policy rate gives us ample room to respond to any risks we may face, including the risk of unwelcome further weakening in labor market conditions.
So this just again it's just signaling down what Wall Street as well as the other central banks around the world have been watching what the Fed will do, and so Jay Powell announced that they will be cutting the interest rate, and we expect that to take place sometimes very soon as next month. And finally, today is Women Equality Day. Is a day that, or in the U.S., is a day that celebrates women, women's right to vote, women's right, as we know there is a lot in this election year regarding women's freedom, women's reproductive rights that the Biden-Harris administration have been fighting to ensure that women continue to have control of their body, control of their economic, and control of their life. And he also built, like a lot of the efforts that this administration have put in place, including launching the first Women Health Plan, spearheaded by the First Lady, Dr. Jill Biden, to provide investment into women, the first real investment to look into women's health, as well as, this administration has ensured, President Biden has ensured that there is an equal of diversity of both men and women. There are many women in his cabinet, including Secretary of Treasury, Secretary Janet Yellen. We have the Vice President Kamala Harris, as well as other women leaders in the cabinet, and also senior officials, including MCC CEO Albright, as well as the U.S ambassador to the UN, Ambassador Linda Thomas Greenfield, are just a few of the women that are in the top leading, helping to lead the Biden administration team and efforts, global efforts around the world. This wrap up today's news, and we will see you again tomorrow. Thank you very much for joining us. Have a good night.